Hello, dwellers of the internet, welcome back. Today I want to talk a little bit about The Last Jedi, and this is Star Wars Episode 8. It has been met with extreme criticism, as all Star Wars films have been, but the difference between this film and any other in the saga is that this film has developed a reputation for being the most divisive of Star Wars films amongst fans and anyone who watches the films alike, whether you're approaching it from a Star Wars fan perspective or a film itself fan perspective. And because of the variation in perspectives and reference points that are used in construction of people's viewpoints on this film, I believe that's the root cause of the divisiveness that people are having. And I'm not fully recording this video to address that specifically. What I do want to talk about is one main key point that a lot of supposedly hardcore and true Star Wars fans, meaning fans that have either grown up with the original trilogy or have watched enough Star Wars growing up and have consumed every episode and every piece of media having to do with it, people who have enough of the Star Wars mythos consumed and absorbed into their psyche, as far as watching and analyzing every piece of media that the franchise has produced, not only in Legends canon but in the current canon through Disney. I'm assuming that's what they mean when they reference themselves as true Star Wars fans. And mind you, time differentiation plays a part in this as well. If they're referencing themselves as true Star Wars fans, and they have only just discovered Star Wars because of the hype of episodes 7 and 8, they would be considered a new breed of Star Wars fans, but I don't think that they can make the argument from the standpoint that they can supposedly lay claim to what Luke represents as a character and what he embodied as a character and who this character even is, unless they have gone through the films multiple times and have, I realize I am sounding like a complete, what is it called? I guess hipster would be the right word for it. Not even really hipster, because that sounds too new and too broad of a term to use for, new Star Wars fans. But people who proclaim themselves as true Star Wars fans who understand the character of Luke Skywalker, which gets me to my main point, which is about Luke Skywalker in the first place. Which I guess, I guess we can ignore the relevance to what is and what isn't, what can be and what cannot be considered true Star Wars fans. We can address that later. For now, I want to talk about one specific point. Point being, in Star Wars The Last Jedi, so many fans have come forward proclaiming to be true Star Wars fans, quote-unquote, people who have grown up with the original trilogy and who understand Luke as being the character that he is, above all else, whatever that may entail to you. They have made the claim that this person is out of character in The Last Jedi. And to them, I say that I fundamentally disagree. They're just wrong. I didn't grow up going to the movie theaters to see Luke Skywalker, but let me tell you that the first person I saw to wield the Force was Luke Skywalker. The first person I saw in a film to represent so much and to have that significance that Star Wars brings to all of its fans was Luke Skywalker. I watched the original trilogy first, before I knew how to speak completely. And not only that, but I've watched the original trilogy countless times. I'm telling you, there has not been a consecutive 6 months in my life that I can remember where I did not watch the entirety of the original trilogy, or the prequels for that matter, since I have been exposed to them, or any kind of, Star Wars official episodic lore reference, you know what I mean? I have watched episodes 4 through 6 and 1 through 3 as many times as I possibly could, and not because I felt a need to or obligation to, because that wasn't the case. I did it because I loved the story, because I had an attachment to it, because Star Wars has manifested itself not in my brain as a concept or an idea that you attached to for the fandom's sake. This is part of my being. This is part of my psyche. So I don't want to sound condescending or cocky here, but I believe I know a thing or two about the character of Luke Skywalker. I believe I understand who that character was. I believe after watching the film enough times to not only get a general reaction of it, to have an emotional and, dare I say, spiritual reaction to it, but to watch it enough times to have an analytical reaction to it, and to not only have a pure instinct-based bias of this analytical reaction, but I've watched it enough times to reevaluate that analytical reaction over and over and over and over again. Now, one would assume that fans of the original trilogy who are on this boat of, oh, Luke was mischaracterized in The Last Jedi, would have enough time to go over it that much, if not more, to understand that Luke wasn't mischaracterized in The Last Jedi, to understand that, you know what, I haven't mentioned the point. I need to get back to the point. The reason why people have such a problem with this portrayal of Luke in The Last Jedi is, to a lesser extent, I've seen less problems with this, but to a lesser extent that he is a hermit on an island, and people expected him to be a perfected Jedi Master, one who had reformed back to the ways of the Old Republic, or the, or the New, or not the New Republic, the Republic that is current in episodes 1 through 3, as far as Jedi training is concerned. And Luke pretty much clears that up himself. He, found through training the flaws in the Jedi. He found through study and through acquisition of, ancient texts and most likely history lessons that he didn't mention in the original trilogy, but he certainly knew about by the time 30 years had passed from the original trilogy to the sequel trilogy, that gave him insight to the corruption and to the issues with the current Jedi Order that was in place at the time. And God, I'm losing the point. What the fuck was I talking about? What the fuck am I even talking about? This is an issue that goes on and on with these videos. I try to be spontaneous, and I try to be sporadic in my explanation of things, and I think I have all the details in my head, but by the time I get one detail out, my thoughts have carried me to at least 5 or 6 other more important details, and by the time I have a chance to explain 1 or 2 of those details, the other 4 or 5 that have spawned themselves in my head manically, I can't get to because they've since faded and don't pertain to the conversation anymore, because they are now considered background to my brain, I guess, and are put on hold or just deleted completely because I can only explain 1 or 2 ideas at a time. I have too much of a desire to explain something than I do to remember the amount of ideas that do pop up in my head, so I have no choice but to take these ideas one at a time, because each idea holds such a profound amount of information within it that I can't simply explain 5 or 6 ideas in a limited amount of time. It's very difficult. Anyways, the main point that people try to bring up for why Luke was mischaracterized regardless of their point of orientation, is because he attempted, or not even attempted, but he thought about killing Ben Solo, and he almost went through with this action, which caused the downfall of his newly reconstructed Knights of Ren and Jedi Order. And I understand to a certain extent where people are coming from after having seen his ending scene in Return of the Jedi, where he stands before the Emperor, he has the opportunity to kill Vader, and he tosses his lightsaber away, tells the Emperor in one of the most iconic scenes in Star Wars history, I'll never turn to the dark side. You've failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me. And this is shown and displayed to be his, most charismatic and most definitive moment as a Jedi and as a hero who has completed that hero's journey, who is brave enough to stand in the face of darkness. Before I get off on another tangent, I could go on and on about the significance of this scene, but this is primarily used as the evidence for why Luke was mischaracterized in The Last Jedi, and I look at it, and to me, it only demonstrates to me that people are thinking of their characters as monotonous, of a monotone, of only exhibiting one trait. The fact that he was able to stand against the dark side and stand against the Sith is great. It's fucking fantastic, don't get me wrong. But that's not what makes a character great. What makes a character great is them being multifaceted, is them being intricate, is them being complicated and not defined by one of their many, many actions. If you want to look at the entirety of Luke Skywalker's character, all you have to do is look 15 seconds prior, where not only did he attack Vader in the attempt to kill him after his speech about how he wouldn't fight him and about how he wouldn't go against him and about how he was attempting to convert him back to the light side, which was true of his character. It was true of his attempts. It was something he, viewed as an ultimate goal, and what he attempted to do, what he tried to do as, a person with noble intentions and a person trying to practice the ultimate good and what he viewed at the time as the true Jedi way of, the way of forgiveness, the way of redemption. But this entire scene, this entire layout of scenes, I should say, demonstrates not only that aspect of him, but the element of him that is susceptible quite obviously to the dark side of the Force, not only due to his family lineage, but due to his intentions in general. He goes from having this perspective of trying to turn his father to the light side to viewing this situation as not worth it, to viewing his father as condemnable and as destructible because he made the threat to his sister, because he made the threat to someone who was so close to him that all of his supposedly altruistic and idealistic speeches was threatening. It made it sound like everything he was saying was bullshit, because as soon as Vader tells him that he's threatening his sister, somebody who's remotely close to him, he becomes susceptible to the dark side of the Force. Not only that, but he uses this power to defeat Vader. Few people actually recognize that as canonical fact. Luke had to tap into his feelings of anger and hatred towards Vader in order to defeat him. much like Anakin had to do with Count Dooku. It was not just protectiveness of his sister that, and a zen within his mind that caused him to protect protect his sister and act on this notion of Vader turning her to the dark side. It had a hell of a lot more to do with the fact that Luke had a deep rage and desire to cause a difference in what was happening in the universe as far as the empirical rule and the actions of his father directly. And as soon as his father, he preached seemingly poetically and zenfully as a Jedi to his father about how he knew there was good still in him, and about how he could free him from his hatred, and about how he knows that there is conflict within him when it pertains to the light and darkness. But as soon as Vader threatened his sister, he was willing to sacrifice all of that for not a brief moment, but an extended period of time, fighting off his father, attempting to kill him, if it wasn't for that last moment of hesitation, that last moment of realization and reflection where he knew he hadn't defeated him, but he had him at his mercy. If he didn't realize that, and he, let's say, just so happened to cut Vader down with one of his angered strikes, not accidentally, but just by, through the occurrence of mere happenstance, had done it, he wouldn't have regretted it. He would have thought to him, he probably would have regretted it, but he would have indeed struck his father down using the dark side of the Force, which would have brought him closer to the dark side of the Force. And ultimately, Luke does stand against this, which is what cements him as a character, which is part of the argument that people are, reasoning for when they, to bring it back to the point, which is part of the reason why they are attempting to argue that he's mischaracterized in The Last Jedi. But if you think about it, what happens in The Last Jedi that people have such an issue with is that he activates, this is a lightsaber ignition and a thought of prevention. This is a thought of protection. He looks into his nephew's mind and he sees the destruction of worlds. He sees the potential of who would become known as Kylo Ren in the future. He sees the deaths of countless innocents that do not deserve it. And after such an experience of going through the ranks of the Empire, having almost lost his life because he attempted to redeem his father, wouldn't you assume that the character of Luke Skywalker would have an inkling of not only a desire to prevent thousands of deaths from occurring, but a responsibility to the Force and to the people around him to eliminate one life to save that many? He had a vision of the future, which, I'm assuming at this point he knew was correct, which it became. He goes through the same tragedy as Anakin Skywalker does, trying to prevent tragedy, and in the process creating the outcome that he feared. Now this is even more tragic for Luke, I think, because Anakin had to do a hell of a lot more to bring about his tragedy. All Luke had, Anakin force-choked the person he was trying to protect. He succumbed so much to the dark side and to the influence of the power that he was gaining itself that he allowed himself to be subdued by the dark side. What Luke did was have a thought, a simple thought, and went through with one single action that was going to be the beginning of what he thought would be a preventative measure that would save thousands, millions even. How many beings do you think lived on planets that were destroyed by Starkiller Base? And this thought and this one action of simply activating a lightsaber, and then the thought promptly fading away, because that is who Luke is. That is the defining moment of his character, is that he realizes he is wrong. It's not Luke Skywalker to be perfect, okay? If you think that's the truth, you're wrong. What it is to be Luke Skywalker is to be susceptible to the dark side, to be strong in the Force, to be constantly learning and constantly evolving. It was not out of character for Luke to draw that lightsaber. He had a goal, which was to protect the ones he loved most. And do you think for a second, if Luke saw the possibility of Kylo Ren eliminating his closest friends and allies, Han Solo and Leia, Princess Leia, his sister, his might-as-well-be brother, the people who he had stuck with and developed this relationship with that had so much significance to it, do you think he wouldn't have some kind of inverse reaction to knowing that maybe somewhere down the line in the future this person could eliminate his best friends, could eliminate the best chance for there to be balance in the universe, for the Force to be at peace in the galaxy? Of course he thought about killing this person. It wouldn't be the first time a Jedi ever thought about striking down someone who had the potential to destroy, that they could stop the destruction of simply by killing one person. This is about one life versus millions. This isn't about a nephew and his uncle. This isn't about a master and his apprentice even. This situation was about the fate of the galaxy, mind you, and the state of the Force that it was in. The destruction of all that Luke had built because he refused to kill one Jedi that happened to be close to him. He thought for a second that it might be worth it. And don't you fuckers tell me that you wouldn't have thought about it even. Okay? He prepares for the action. He thinks about the action, but he does not ultimately go through with it. Now what that means to me is perfect Luke Skywalker characterization. What did he do in Return of the Jedi? He tried to kill his father. After reflection, after a moment of clarity, he realizes it's not the correct decision. He realizes his idealism towards the Jedi and towards what he believes to be the ultimate good win, and in the end, what happens in The Last Jedi? The same exact thing, only it happens a hell of a lot faster. He didn't have a lightsaber duel with Kylo. He drew his lightsaber and then immediately regretted it because he knew the negative effect that what he was doing could possibly have. He eliminated what he describes as a fleeting thought in his mind, and then he paid for it. He paid for simply the thought, which is a great tragedy, ultimately. Having your fate sealed by simply having a thought, and by not even going through with the actions to prevent it, like Anakin Skywalker had, but thinking about going through with it, like Luke did. It quite possibly could be considered an even more tragic scenario than Anakin Skywalker's story. Granted, his story led to far worse and more grotesque physical pain. Luke had to deal with the fact that a simple thought and beginning to a procession of action had to live with him through the effect of Kylo Ren his entire life, that entire 30 years between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. So, in closing, is Luke mischaracterized in The Last Jedi? Fuck no. And I know I'm gonna sound terrible here, but if you think so, you don't fucking know who Luke Skywalker is. And you haven't watched enough of him, you haven't watched it enough times, you haven't analyzed it enough to understand who this character is and what he means, ultimately. Goodbye.